Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a pilgrim in a children's book. You're not here to give thanks. You're here because you didn't die, not yet. You're one of the few who survived the voyage, the fever, the hunger, the bitter first winter that buried half the colony before spring. You've watched friends starve, watched your own fingers turn grey from cold, watched the fires go out one by one. And now, as autumn drags its heels and the air stinks of wet wood and old smoke, you're being told to celebrate, with strangers, with food you can barely keep down, with the uneasy peace that holds only because the Wampanoag have decided, for now, not to let you fail entirely. Before we gather round this infamous table, do me one small favour. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love hearing who's tuning in from around the world. And if you'd like early access to more of these slow unravellings, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You wake up cold, not the deep, bone-cracking cold of January, but the kind that clings, wet and persistent, slipping through the seams in the walls and settling into your clothes before you're even fully awake. The kind that never quite leaves, no matter how many layers you pile on. You blink into the dimness of the room, the air sour with damp wood, old fish and the mildew that's been creeping down the corner post since midsummer. You slept badly again. The straw mat beneath you has thinned to little more than dust in a sack, and you're not sure if the sharpness in your back is a splinter or one of your own ribs pressing through too thin flesh. You sit up slowly. Your joints resist with a dull, steady ache. It's worse in the mornings now, especially your knees and your fingers, which don't quite straighten unless you work them for a while. Your shoulders pop faintly as you reach for your boots, and you notice the stiffness in your neck, a crick that's been bothering you since you spent a night on the floor. 2 weeks ago, you'd given up your mat to a sick boy who didn't survive the night anyway. You still don't know his name. There's barely any light. What little filters through the narrow cracks in the shutters is the colour of old pewter, grey, dull, washed thin. You can hear the wind tapping at the sides of the hut, shifting the warped boards that never quite fit together the way they should. Someone once called this structure a home, though that feels generous. It's shelter. Barely. The floor is dirt, the walls are soft with moisture, and there's a small hearth near the back, long gone cold. The ash inside is damp to the touch. You know, because you checked it in the night, hoping something might still smoulder. Nothing did. You pull your cloak around your shoulders. It's stiff with salt and stained with old grease, but it's still one of the better ones. You've sewn it back together at least 3 times. You used to be careful about the stitches, hiding them in the folds. Now you just crisscross whatever thread you can find. A torn cloak is still a cloak. You run your hands over your arms and feel your bones through the fabric. You're not starving, not anymore, but you're still shrinking. You lose weight differently now. Slower, quieter, more permanently. Outside you hear someone sneeze, then a cough. The wet, tearing kind. It goes on longer than it should. You know the sound. That's Edward, most likely. He's been sick since late summer. You're not sure how he's still breathing, and you're not convinced he will be by next week. You stop listening after a while. If he lives, he lives. If not, he joins the others. You rise and push open the door. The latch sticks, like it always does, and you have to shove your weight into it, shoulder against the wood. It groans but gives, and the door swings outward on rusted hinges. A gust of damp morning air greets you. It isn't freezing, not quite, but it's raw. The kind of chill that seeps through wet fabric and makes your skin prickle. The sky overhead is low and colourless. Pale clouds hang heavy, stretching out to the edge of the trees, and everything feels dim, even the trees themselves, their yellow leaves darkened by mist. You step outside and breathe in. The air tastes faintly of smoke and wet bark. There's a thin mist rising from the ground, where the cold met yesterday's rain, Your boots sink slightly in the soft dirt. The colony looks quiet. Half-built cabins crouch low along the muddy clearing, chimneys coughing up faint trails of wood smoke. Some of the thatched roofs are still patchwork, some still tarp. Half the windows are just holes covered with cloth. The whole place feels half done, as if it was built in a hurry by people who didn't expect to stay long. You suppose that's not far from the truth. You nod to a woman hauling a bucket toward the well. She doesn't return the gesture. Her eyes are down. Her hair is uncovered, and her hands are red with cold. You think you remember her husband's name, but he hasn't been seen in weeks. You don't ask. No one asks anymore. Asking invites answers, and no one has the energy for those. As you make your way past the row of cabins, you pass by the edge of the burial plot. Just a stretch of lumpy ground now, the grass barely growing, the earth still discoloured from the constant digging. No names, no headstones, just wooden markers stuck at odd angles, leaning like drunks in the wind. 67 last count. Some say more. You helped dig the first dozen. By the 30th, you stopped counting. By the 40th, you stopped feeling anything at all. You remember the cold nights last winter, how the snow crept in through the roof beams, how you learned to breathe through a scrap of cloth to keep your lungs from freezing. You remember chewing dried leather and trying to boil sawdust into broth, the frost on the inside of the walls, the sound of men crying in the dark, thinking no one could hear. You remember rationing biscuits, hiding flour, and offering thanks for a spoonful of weak broth. Compared to that, this weather feels almost kind, but only almost. A cluster of men stands near the common house, murmuring quietly. You approach without meaning to, just drawn by the sound of voices. Most are in cloaks or furs, though none look warm. There's a rabbit strung over someone's shoulder, small, half-starved, barely worth the effort of cooking. A few of the others are holding baskets with herbs or roots. One man pokes at a bundle of dried corn. A few chuckle, but it's not a warm sound. It's just something to fill the space. Someone mentions the Wampanoag. A few nod. You hear the word Massasoit. Then they say he might come. Another voice, older, flat with disinterest. 24, maybe more. That earns a look. Then a muttered curse. Someone else spits into the dirt, and then it comes. The word floats out from the cluster, like smoke from a dying fire. Feast, you blink. At first you think you misheard. Then another voice repeats it, louder this time. They'll be feasting today. It sounds absurd, comical, like hearing the word harvest in a famine or parade in a graveyard. You stare at them for a moment, half expecting someone to laugh. No one does. A man beside you shrugs and says, "Orders came yesterday. We're to gather food, set a table, make a showing." He doesn't sound pleased, just resigned. Another man beside him says something about diplomacy. Another calls it a celebration. You don't know which of them is right, maybe none. You glance back toward the burial ground, then toward the low cabins, their walls still weeping moisture from last night's rain. A few children pass by, barefoot, their clothes too thin. One of them coughs as he walks. The sound echoes strangely in the still morning air. You're not sure what to think. You're not sure what there is to celebrate. As the group starts to disperse, you stand still, letting the chill creep under your cloak. Your hands are already numb. You rub them together slowly, watching the faint trail of smoke rising from the nearby chimney. A crow cries from somewhere in the trees, sharp and sudden. You flinch, then look up. The sky hasn't changed. The clouds are still heavy. It might rain again. The talk of a feast dissolves into the raw morning air, leaving you standing in the half-formed clearing that dares to call itself a town. You shift your weight, feeling mud pull at your boots, and let your gaze drift across the scatter of structures that remain. Cabins huddle together in irregular rows, their plank walls warped by brine-soaked winds. Their roofs a patchwork of thatch, tarred canvas, and whatever driftwood could be pried from the shore. Most windows still gape open to the elements, unplugged now, with hanging rags or nailed boards scabbed over with pitch. Doors slump on twisted leather hinges. Shutters tilt like broken wings. A newcomer might mistake the place for a construction site abruptly abandoned, not a settlement clinging to its second year of life. Between the cabins lie the ghosts of projects that never reached completion. Here a frame intended for a granary, its beams charred at the ends, where last winter's fires ate through carelessly dropped embers. There a half-dug ditch meant for fencing, but now a shallow rut bristling with weeds. Sawhorses have become makeshift benches, their legs wobbling under the thin weight of men who no longer bother to sit straight. Everywhere you look, tools are missing handles, barrels leak at the seams, rope sags with rot. When the wind nudges loose shingles, they clatter like bones on a drum. Toward the western edge, the burial ground pushes against the living space with indecent intimacy. Fresh mounds and older, weather-flattened rises stand only a few strides from doorsteps. Crosses fashioned from broom handles, broken oars or stripped saplings lean at awkward angles. Their crude arms bound with twine. You count them out of habit, 40, then 50, then you give up, because the number keeps shifting in your head. You think of the governor's boy, cheeks flushed even as fever glazed his eyes. Of your bunkmate, too weak to lift his own blanket when the coughing fits tore through his chest. Of the little lad who cried for his mother until the silence took him. You never learned the child's family name. You still remember the sound of dirt thudding onto his small pine box in the dark. Closer to the tree line, thin survivors toil with a kind of mechanistic patience. One man hacks at green wood for cooking fires, striking again and again, though each swing lands lower than the last. A woman drags a bundle of cattail roots toward a lean-to, her steps uneven, as if one hip has stiffened beyond remedy. A pair of youths wrestles with a rigged net meant for trapping wildfowl. The net catches on an uprooted stump, and the older boy curses softly, then coughs hard enough to bend him double. No one offers help. It is not cruelty so much as arithmetic. Every calorie spent on mercy is one fewer for survival. You follow the worn track that serves as the colony's main path, boots sucking at the muck, and past the storehouse. The structure lists to one side, propped by a diagonal spar hammered into the ground at a desperate angle. Inside, barrels stand half-filled with shriveled maize, smoked fish, and a meagre cache of venison strips. Little comfort for the winter crouching just beyond the horizon. Last March you helped guard that door at night, musket clutched in numb fingers, because a starving man is only a whisker away from theft. Hunger makes strangers of comrades. You witnessed it more than once when hands met in the dark over the same mouldy crust. A few strides on, the common house rises, larger than any single dwelling but hardly imposing, its ridgepole sagging under damp thatch. Here the colony's leaders hold council, argue over track lines none of you can see, count dwindling spoons of meal, and pray for providence with heads bowed low enough to smell each other's unwashed hair. You recall the day the roof finally shed last winter's snow with a roar, scattering frightened men like pigeons as icy water poured over the ledger books. The ink bled down the pages in watery black tears, erasing debts and promises alike. No one has bothered to rewrite them. Your steps take you past a little pen where two half-grown pigs squeal, ribs like barrel staves under slack skin. They root at the frozen earth, noses crusted with mud. One looks up at you, eyes wet and dull, and for a moment you wonder whether the animal can taste its own future in the air. Somewhere beyond the pen, you hear a crack of gunfire, another hopeful shot toward the uncertain feast, and a scattering of gulls lifts skyward, their cries harsh as scraping steel. You pause near a rickety shelter whose walls are patched with overlapping bark sheets. It once belonged to a family of 6. Now only a widower sleeps inside, rising each dawn to mend nets no one is strong enough to cast. A corner of roof cloth flaps loose, revealing the interior where a single blanket hangs from a string, for privacy, though privacy has lost all meaning in a place where grief is communal. You remember when the woman who lived there boiled nettles for her children, watching the pot with hollowed eyes as she whispered a hymn. The tune clings to you still, though you never learned the words. At the clearing's edge, smoke curls from the smithy's half-collapsed forge, just enough fire to soften nails for repairs. The smith himself, once broad as an oak, now stoops like a willow twig. He works the bellows in slow strokes, sweat beading on a brow lined deeper than his years warrant. A teenager stands beside him, turning a cracked hinge in the coals. The glow stains their gaunt faces the colour of old copper. Sparks rise, flare and fade, brief stars in a sky that dawn refuses to brighten. You push your cloak tighter and sweep the horizon. The Atlantic lurks a mile east behind dunes scoured flat by nor'easters. Most mornings you can smell the salt, long before you see the water, but today the air carries only smoke, damp earth, and the faintest tang of decaying leaves. Somewhere out there, across 3,000 miles of heaving grey waves, lies the country you left behind. A place that grows distant, even in memory. Your old village fades whenever you try to picture it, as though seawater rinsed the details from your mind during the crossing. You recall the voyage instead, the stench below decks, the roll of the ship that never matched the beat of your heart, the shrieks when the mainmast groaned in a gale. You recall the burial at sea of the carpenter's wife, her shroud sewn with heavy stones, while the rest of you huddled for warmth, praying you wouldn't be next. A movement to your right draws your attention back to the present. A man in a patched jerkin is piling stones around the base of his chimney to keep out drafts. You recognise him as your one-time bunkmate's older brother. He sees you looking, straightens, and offers a tired nod. His eyes lose focus halfway through the gesture, as though memory has caught him mid-motion. You imagine he's thinking of the bunkmate too, how the young man's fever climbed, how he whispered nonsense to someone who wasn't there, how you both held him down when the convulsions came because you were sure he'd snap his own spine. When the shaking stopped, he exhaled once, long and rattling, and that was that. You remember feeling nothing at all, just an odd floating emptiness that settled in the pit of your stomach and never quite left. The faint conversation of the hunting party drifts over from the tree line, men bickering about shot sizes and snares, voices cracking on the edge of hope. You know why they press on despite exhaustion. The treaty with the Wampanoag. Without that fragile understanding, without the advice Massasoit's people gave you on which crops might survive, which roots would cure fevers, which fields to leave fallow, you would already be bones in the sandy soil. Even the most stubborn among you grudgingly admit it in private. The alliance is thin though, stitched with mistrust and necessity rather than friendship. Some settlers still polish their muskets whenever they glimpse Wampanoag scouts at the edge of the forest, as if steel were a charm against history itself. You remember the first meeting, how Interpreter Squanto wove phrases back and forth, how every smile looked like a grimace, how each side admired the weapons the other carried. You remember wondering whether their kindness was a prelude to domination, or whether your presence was the same. Either way, you all left that clearing alive, and for Plymouth, that counted as triumph. Since then, a trickle of venison, maize and fish has flowed from the Wampanoag villages to your lopsided storehouse. In return, you offer beads, knives, the possibility, no more than that, of shared defence against rival nations. You suspect they find your gifts amusing. You fear someday they'll decide amusement isn't worth the trouble. A sudden voice breaks your reverie. It comes from just behind, low and scratchy with sleeplessness. They say the Sachem's folk might come today, the man mutters, half to himself, half to you, as he edges past with a bundle of kindling. 20 of 'em, maybe 30. Makes a body wonder what kind of feast that'll be. He does not wait for a reply, but you watch his narrow shoulders as he limps away. The word hangs there in the morning damp. Wampanoag. You nod slightly, though the man who spoke it is already gone, his bundle of sticks bouncing against one hip as he vanishes between two leaning cabins. You stand still for another moment, watching your breath drift upward into the low, heavy sky. Then you turn toward the common house, feet squelching in the soft earth. A few others have the same idea, converging silently from across the settlement. No one says much. Words like food are used sparingly these days. By the time you reach the structure, a loose crowd has already formed. 12 men, a few women, all wrapped in cloaks and shawls, faces pale beneath layers of grime and smoke. They murmur in clusters, huddled near the doorway, as if the building itself might shield them from whatever announcement waits inside. The door is open, just enough to let out a wisp of stale air, thick with sweat and pipe smoke. You catch the scent and feel your stomach tighten, not from hunger exactly, something lower than that. Resentment maybe? Dread in the shape of appetite? A figure emerges, Governor Bradford, or what remains of him. His coat hangs from narrow shoulders, worn thin at the elbows. His hair, once swept with some ceremony, now clings to his temples in wet strands. He lifts a hand for silence, and the group obliges, not because he commands it, but because no one has the energy to fill the air with noise. When he speaks, his voice is low, scratchy from disuse or too much talking behind closed doors. You aren't sure which. He begins with phrases you've heard before. Providence, brotherhood, opportunity. You feel each word land with a soft thud in your mind, like dirt on a coffin lid. You've grown used to these speeches, equal parts sermon and justification, made not to inspire, but to hold the walls of the colony upright by force of repetition. A few heads nod. Most do not. He talks of visitors, of Massasoit, of honouring the friendship that has sustained us in our hour of trial. You glance at a man beside you, one eye swollen shut from a splinter that festered last week. He doesn't react. Bradford says the Sachem and his men may arrive today, or tomorrow, or not at all, but preparations must be made regardless. He says it like an invitation, but you recognise it as an order. Beside him, another man steps forward. Winslow, probably, always ready with a plan. He reads off a list in that clipped, confident way that men use when they believe in structure. Game must be gathered. Deer, fowl, anything that can be smoked or boiled. Roots, nuts, wild fruit, if any still remain on the thorned brambles at the forest's edge. Eel, if the traps still work. Corn, dried and ground. If the insects haven't taken too much of it. You note how often the word "if" floats behind each item. Someone mutters under their breath that the eel traps were damaged in the last storm. Another replies that they'll mend quickly enough. A third voice wonders aloud what you're supposed to feed a visiting party of warriors when you barely have enough to chew between your own teeth. No one responds to that, not out loud. More instructions follow. Divided tasks, delegated chores, the name of a boy told to help strip feathers from anything that flies. You're listed too. You're to gather greens. Whatever bitter leaves can still be coaxed from the thinning edges of the field. You nod without emotion. There's nothing to protest. Work is work. Orders mean food. You've learned not to question the logic, because logic doesn't matter. Not here. A younger man in the crowd, one of the new arrivals, barely grown, face too soft for this place, raises a hand and asks, almost timidly, why this is happening. Why now? The room stills slightly, and you feel a few heads turn in his direction, though no one speaks. Bradford waits, lets the silence stretch, then says the word Thanksgiving in a voice so level it barely registers. Just that one word, no further explanation. He doesn't say what's being given, or who it's being given to. The younger man lowers his hand and stares at the floor. You study the dust near your own boots and feel something shift in your chest. Not anger, not sorrow, just that tired, hollow echo that comes when meaning and hunger collide and cancel each other out. Thanksgiving. You roll the word over in your head like a stone in your palm. What exactly are you meant to be thankful for? That your body still moves? That the cough in your throat isn't deep enough to kill you? That you didn't die last winter, or the winter before that, or on the voyage over? You suppose that's something. The meeting breaks apart slowly, as if the group is reluctant to admit it heard what it heard. No one rushes. There's no sudden movement, no barked commands or cheering resolution. Just a shuffle of feet, the creak of wet leather, the rustle of cloaks. You step back from the doorway and feel a drizzle beginning. Just a fine mist at first, the kind that clings to your hair and sinks into your sleeves. You don't bother pulling up your hood. You're already damp, and the difference between dry and wet has become mostly theoretical. A woman hands you a piece of parchment, folded into a narrow slip. Your name is written on it in a hand you recognise, one of the clerks who used to keep ledgers, now tasked with keeping track of who's still standing. Beneath your name is a brief list: sorrel, cress, turnip greens. If none of those, then acorns to roast. You scan the words and fold it away without a word. The ink is already beginning to run. Someone at your side says they think this is all for show, that the feast is a signal, a performance meant to prove to the Wampanoag that the English are still strong, still civilised, still capable of dignity and generosity, even if they've been eating boiled bark for a month. Another replies that it's just a distraction, something to keep the colony from falling apart under the weight of boredom and rot. A third man, older and quieter than the others, says simply that when your stomach is empty, any excuse to fill it will do. You don't contribute to the discussion. You just stand there, clutching your scrap of orders, listening to the water drip from the eaves, and thinking about bones. Not metaphorical ones, real ones. The ones in the dirt behind the cabins, the ones in your hands, your back, your neck, growing more pronounced with each missed meal. The ones in the barrel, yes, that barrel, the one where someone once whispered they found a finger bone after that awful week in February, and then stopped talking about it altogether. You blink the rain from your lashes and wonder again about the word feast. It conjures images that don't belong here. Roasted meat, laughter, full plates passed hand to hand in firelight. Those are lies told by painters and pamphleteers. Here it will be more eel than turkey, more silence than speech. It will be chewing with your head down, swallowing fast, glancing sideways to see if someone else got more than you. It will be sitting near men you don't trust, next to guests you don't understand, smiling at people you suspect of waiting for you to fail. Still you will do as you're told. You will go to the fields, or what's left of them. You will gather what you can. You will strip the bark and shake the leaves, and pull whatever roots have not yet rotted in the soil. You will return with a handful of bitter things, and place them on a table that is not a table, beside a man who is not your friend, in a moment that is not a celebration. And you will call it Thanksgiving, because someone told you to. You step off the muddy track and into the woods without ceremony. No prayer, no plan, just a short list in your head, and the familiar weight of obligation tightening across your shoulders like a half-frozen cloak. The trees crowd together quickly beyond the settlement's edge, their trunks damp and dark, bark peeling in curls where moss has taken hold. The path beneath your feet narrows to a strip of packed earth scattered with slick leaves and broken twigs. The forest has a smell you still haven't gotten used to: wet rot, pine resin, and something sharp and animal beneath it all, like musk rubbed into old cloth. Your hands are already cold. You blow into them, flex your fingers, then reach down to adjust the trap basket hanging from your hip. It's a crude thing, woven reeds, patched with sinew, better suited to carrying eel than anything delicate. You carry a knife as well, though not for defence. It's a gutting blade, short and dull at the tip, the kind you use to scrape fish scales or cut bark from a root when you can't tell if it's food or poison, which is often. Around you, the forest shifts with every step. The wind stirs the branches high above, and something small darts through the underbrush just ahead. Too quick to see, but enough to make you pause. Your eyes flick toward the source of the sound, and your hand drops instinctively to the knife, even though you know better. No one's ever stabbed a fox fast enough to stop it running. You let out a slow breath and keep walking. You crouch beside a cluster of sorrel near the base of a low rise, the leaves slick with dew, the stems thin and sharp as wire. You know the shape now, heart-like, with that sour tang on the tongue that means it won't kill you. You pick a handful, rubbing off the dirt with your sleeve, and tuck them into your basket. Not much, but they'll add colour to the pot. Maybe a sourness to mask the bitterness of everything else. Farther on, you find a patch of turnip greens. The bulbs are long since spoiled or gnawed by worms, but the leaves are intact, if limp and pocked with holes. You tear them away gently, careful not to bring too much of the soil with them, though your hands are already blackened by it. The earth here is heavy with moisture, the kind that seeps under your nails and doesn't wash out for days. In the distance, a musket cracks, sharp and hollow, then another, farther off. You pause and listen for birds scattering, for shouting, for anything that might suggest someone hit their mark. But the woods swallow sound quickly, and all you hear is wind again, sighing through the canopy above, like breath through clenched teeth. You wonder what they found. A wild turkey, maybe. More likely a squirrel or a gull if someone strayed near the coast. You've eaten both. You'll eat them again. By midday the mist has lifted, but the cold has not. Your fingers are stiff as twigs, your breath visible in short, shallow puffs. You pause beside a bend in the creek, the water low but still trickling. It smells brackish here, like silt and dead leaves. You check the eel traps, woven cones staked along the muddy edge of the stream. 2 are empty, 1 holds movement. You reach in slowly, fingers submerged in water that burns with cold, and pull it out. The eel is long, thick-bodied and slick as oil. It writhes once in your grip, then goes still. You kill it quickly, using the heel of your knife, then thread it through with twine. It's not much, but it's meat, and that's more than most can say today. You reset the trap and move on. Later you meet a boy, Thomas maybe or John, kneeling beside a broken fence line with a pheasant clutched awkwardly to his chest. Its neck hangs limp. He says he didn't shoot it himself, but found it near the edge of the trap line, blood still warm. He asks if you'll help pluck it, since his hands are shaking too much. You sit beside him and begin stripping the feathers, working slowly, pulling with the grain to avoid tearing the skin. The down clings to your sleeves. You try not to think about how it will taste, sinewy and bland, roasted on too much smoke, too little fat. After the bird is clean, you leave the boy with the carcass and wander farther uphill into an older part of the forest where the trees stand tall and straight, their trunks too wide to wrap your arms around. This is where you first saw Wampanoag hunters last spring, moving between the trees without sound, their faces unreadable as they passed within bowshot of your party. You remember the way they looked at you, not hostile, not friendly, just observant, measuring. You kneel beside a tree and scrape a bit of bark loose. It's birch, dry and papery. It will burn quickly, but it also adds a sharp note to stew if shredded fine. You tuck a few strips into your basket and pause to rub warmth back into your hands. You watch the woods for a while, trying to listen past the wind. The land still feels foreign to you, even now. Every root seems laced with danger, every berry suspicious. Even the birds sound different. The calls don't match what you knew back home. You still flinch at certain rustlings, unsure whether you're hearing prey or predator, settler or stranger. You make your way back slowly, the sun dipping behind a haze of clouds that never truly broke. Your boots are soaked, the seams crusted with a slurry of ash and mud. Your left ankle aches from where you slipped earlier on, a slick patch of moss, and caught yourself too late to avoid the twist. Your hands are shaking from cold and strain, knuckles split where the skin's gone brittle. Still, your basket holds something. Sorrel, bark, 2 eels, a handful of turnip greens, and a few stray nuts you found buried in soft soil beneath a tree that might have been a chestnut once. As you near the edge of the colony, you see more smoke now. Some fires are being stoked under iron pots. A woman kneels beside a boiling kettle, adding something green and stringy. From a bundle at her side, it smells like damp seaweed and broth. A man stirs another pot with a broken oar. You see him cough into his sleeve, then resume stirring. Someone calls to you, asks what you've brought, and you lift your basket without answering. Your hands are too cold to gesture properly. They take the contents wordlessly, sorting them into piles, the eel to be gutted, the greens to be boiled down into mush, the bark to be boiled for flavour, though no one believes it adds much more than colour. You move toward the fire and hold your hands over the flames, close enough to sting but not enough to burn. The heat doesn't reach your core, but it brings a slight return of sensation to your fingertips. You flex them carefully and watch the others file in, one by one, each carrying something, or nothing, or just an expression that says they're trying to feel useful. Somewhere behind you, someone is singing softly. You don't recognize the words. Maybe it's a hymn. Maybe it's just a rhythm to keep the mind from wandering too far. You stare into the fire and try to remember how food used to feel. Not just taste, but fullness. Warmth in the gut that lingered after the bowl was clean. That kind of memory doesn't come easily now. Not after this year. Not after burying so many. You think of the feast again, of the table that isn't a table, and the guests you won't understand. You wonder how they'll see all this. Your smoke, your patchwork homes, your threadbare clothes and dull eyes. You wonder if they'll find it sad, or if they'll see what you try not to admit, that you're barely surviving, that you still don't know what you're doing here. The fire cracks and someone laughs, short, sharp, unexpected. You turn, but the sound is already gone. You hold your hands out again, palms open, and watch the steam rise from your sleeves. The warmth helps, not much, but enough to keep you going. You're crouched near the edge of the common house, arranging strips of smoked fish on a rough plank that passes for a serving board. The fish is dark with oil and scorched at the edges, the skin curling away like burnt parchment. It smells like brine, ash, and something faintly sour that you try not to think about. You smooth the pieces out with the back of your fingers, lining them up neatly, because it feels like you should do something carefully today. Everything else has been so rushed, so crude. If this is a feast, even a hollow one, then perhaps the food ought to look orderly, even if no one will care. The wind shifts as you work, lifting a faint trace of wood smoke from the northern edge of the settlement. A few voices rise somewhere behind you, at first a murmur, then louder, then sharper. You pause, hands still resting against the edge of the plank, and turn your head just enough to catch the word carried through the damp air. "They're here!" Someone else shouts it again, with less certainty, as though repeating it will make it truer. You rise slowly, brushing fish oil from your palms onto your cloak, and scan the tree line. Movement, a low ripple in the underbrush, then shapes. Figures emerging from the woods in a slow measured line, like the forest itself is exhaling them. You see them before you hear them, tall, upright, composed. Their strides are long but unhurried. No hesitation, no faltering. At the front, a man adorned in ochre and deep red leads the procession, his chest bare despite the cold, his cloak of woven fibres draped across one shoulder, like a mantle. You don't need anyone to tell you that's Massasoit. There are dozens behind him. Not a handful, not a symbolic delegation, dozens. You count quickly, instinctively, trying to guess how much food you'll need to stretch. 25, 30, more. Some carry bows, others long staffs. None seem nervous. They move like they've done this before, or like they don't expect to be impressed. The expressions on their faces are unreadable. Not cold, not friendly, just still. A murmur spreads among the settlers, soft, quick, and uneven. You hear the scrape of boots on packed earth as people shift and adjust, as if uncertain whether they should stand still or move forward. A woman near you fumbles with a pot lid and lets it fall with a clatter. No one scolds her. The sound is jarring, and all eyes return to the tree line. The Wampanoag are still approaching, steady as a tide. You remember Winslow's instructions, half whispered over the shoulder last week, as he practiced the proper tone for greetings. Don't stare. Don't gesture with your left hand. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't smile too wide. Don't show your teeth. Don't point. Don't touch anything that looks ceremonial. Don't ask questions. Don't offer too much, but don't offer too little. You try to memorize it, but it's all blurring now. The only rule that feels certain is this: don't make a mistake. Massasoit stops just before the clearing. His gaze sweeps the assembled cabins, the lines of half-starved settlers, the low fires, and the weak imitation of order. He says something to the man beside him, a lean figure with painted cheeks and a necklace of bone, and the man replies without looking away from the houses. You can't hear the words. You doubt you'd understand them if you could, but the tone isn't mocking, not amused, just observational. More Wampanoag emerge behind the main group, some younger, some older, some adorned in patterns you don't recognise. The face paint varies, reds, whites, blacks, drawn in lines and swirls and marks that surely mean something, though you've never dared ask. One man's face is divided clean down the middle, white on one side, red on the other. Another has black bands around his arms and carries a small woven basket slung over his shoulder. None of them speak loudly. None look confused. None seem unsure about what they're walking into. A group of settlers nearby begins to form a loose line, as if they might attempt to offer greeting. Then they stop short, hesitating. Someone whispers for the governor. Someone else says he's already coming. You spot him moving quickly from the common house, Winslow trailing behind. Their steps brisk but deliberate. Bradford's coat is newly brushed, and you notice with dull irritation that someone's actually polished his boots. His face, though, is pale and pinched. He raises one hand as he steps forward, palm out, and says something you can't make out. Probably a welcome, probably something about friendship and gratitude and peace under heaven. Winslow follows with a translation. The words sound rounder in his mouth, more fluid, more practiced. Massasoit listens. He says nothing. Not at first. Then he speaks, calm, low, his voice barely lifting above the rustle of wind through the drying leaves. Winslow listens carefully, nods, and turns to translate. More words about peace, about sharing, about observing the harvest, about coming together. You listen, but the meanings don't quite land. You can hear the shape of diplomacy in them, but not the spirit. This isn't a sermon, it's not a story. It's a performance, like everyone's pretending the hard parts of the year didn't happen just long enough to get through the next 2 days. You look again at the Wampanoag line and notice more faces now, more eyes watching, not staring, just watching. They're assessing everything. The quality of your shelters, the thinness of your arms, the state of your firewood, the smoke rising from a pot of watery stew, the chipped blade at your hip. You wonder what they see when they look at you. Barely clothed, barely fed, barely functioning. You wonder if they think you're pitiful, or dangerous, or already defeated. A child behind you sneezes, and someone hushes them too harshly. The sound cuts through the air like a whip. Massasoit's eyes flick briefly toward the noise, then back again. You feel the pressure in the silence that follows, like everyone is holding their breath just a little tighter. Bradford steps back, gesturing for the rest of you to do the same. The path must be cleared, the space opened. The Wampanoag do not walk among you. They walk toward the place that has been set aside for them. A series of rough benches and planks laid out near the central fire, arranged with as much symmetry as could be managed in the short time since the word feast was uttered aloud. A few hastily cleaned stones form a boundary, or a line of demarcation. You don't know what it's meant to represent. Probably nothing. Possibly everything. You're nudged, lightly, but insistently, and realise someone is motioning for you to move forward, to take your place among the settlers standing near the welcome circle. You step carefully, every motion deliberate, feeling the eyes not just of your neighbours, but of the newcomers as well. You don't know what your face looks like. You're not sure what expression you're even trying to wear. Gratitude, wariness, respect. You just try not to stumble. As you find your place shoulder to shoulder with men you barely speak to on ordinary days, you hear someone reciting something in a low voice. Scripture, probably. Maybe a psalm. You glance sideways and catch the faintest tremble in a woman's clasped hands. You don't know if she's praying or holding herself together. The Wampanoag keep coming. Still more of them now, their ranks orderly, their pace unbroken. The sound of their feet on the wet earth is barely audible. You hear the rustle of feathers, the creak of leather straps, the faint clink of bone and shell. None of them laugh, none speak out of turn. Whatever performance is unfolding here, they are not improvising. You stand still, hands at your sides, and watch them come. You're seated now, though the term feels generous. There are no chairs, no true benches, no long tables lined with pewter and candles like the feasts described in the books back home. Just damp logs dragged close to the fire, flat planks perched atop rocks, and cleared patches of grass still soft from last night's rain. The arrangement is loose, settlers clumped in uneven clusters. Wampanoag seated in their own groups nearby, but not entirely apart. No one seems certain whether this is a gathering or a standoff. It might be both. A low fire burns at the centre of it all, smoke curling upward and sideways in the shifting wind, sometimes stinging your eyes, sometimes disappearing altogether. Around it sit dishes, or the rough equivalent of them, lined in bark, stone, or whatever scrap of wood could be carved or found. On them rest the day's offerings. It is, by some measure, a bounty. By others, it's a list of things once described as food. You stare at the pile nearest you, strips of venison, blackened at the edges and tough as old rope, corn mush swimming in pale grease, a lump of something green and wilted that might once have been a turnip leaf. A half-boiled bird, likely pheasant, rests off to one side, its legs splayed at unnatural angles, skin splitting where the meat boiled too long and too unevenly. Someone has added herbs to the pot, but it smells more like mouldy hay than seasoning. No one says grace, there is no declaration of thanks, no unified blessing to mark the occasion. There are murmured words here and there, some settlers muttering scripture under their breath, a few Wampanoag speaking softly among themselves, but no signal that the meal has officially begun. It just starts. A man reaches forward. A hand lifts bread. A woman offers a bowl of stew to the person beside her. No one protests. No one waits. You eat slowly, not out of politeness, but because your body no longer trusts abundance. It's learned to be suspicious of plenty. You take a piece of venison, teeth working through the sinew until your jaw aches. The flavour is sharp, gamey, metallic, tinged with wood smoke. It tastes of bark and blood. You chew until it softens, then swallow hard and move on to the greens, which are soggy and bitter, leaving a waxy film on your tongue that refuses to go away. Across from you, two Wampanoag men share a flat piece of driftwood, layered with roasted fish and squash. Their movements are calm, deliberate, efficient. They speak little, occasionally passing bits of food between them, but their eyes wander. They're watching the settlers, your neighbours, your leaders, maybe even you. Not with hostility, with assessment. You wonder what they're concluding. The governor sits near the fire, his coat freshly brushed, chewing with slow precision. To his left is Winslow, eyes constantly darting from one group to the next as if he's trying to read the room without letting the room know it's being read. Nearby, a settler you vaguely recognise as a Cooper is attempting to share a dish of mashed roots with a Wampanoag boy who looks no older than 12. The boy accepts it with a nod and a neutral expression. You doubt they speak a single word between them. The silence is immense, not absolute, but dense like fog, the kind of quiet that comes not from peace but from uncertainty. You hear the snap of firewood, the hiss of grease, the occasional clink of a spoon against a wooden bowl. Now and then a voice rises, a snatch of conversation, a chuckle quickly swallowed, a low command given from one hunter to another, but it all dissipates too fast to anchor anything. The sound of chewing fills the gaps, not loudly, but constantly, as if the meal is an agreement not to speak. A man beside you drops his bowl. It hits the ground with a dull thud, and he curses under his breath as he picks it up, flicking clumps of dirt from the contents before eating them anyway. No one scolds him. Everyone's too focused on the food in front of them. A woman to your right gnaws a fish spine down to splinters. A child nearby licks grease from her sleeve because there's no cloth to spare. You look around the circle and wonder how many of them are pretending this is normal, pretending that this isn't some awkward, fragile performance cobbled together from diplomacy, desperation, and boiled fowl. That the colonists and the Wampanoag are sharing more than just physical space. That this isn't what it so clearly is, a transaction, an uneasy pause. You shift on the log, adjusting your weight to avoid a knot in the wood that's begun pressing into your thigh. Your feet are damp. The chill has crept into your sleeves, into your collar. Your cloak still smells faintly of eel, despite yesterday's rain and this morning's smoke. You exhale slowly and take another bite, this time from a small cake of corn mush, its edges browned unevenly, the centre still sticky. You chew carefully, trying not to wince as the grease clings to the roof of your mouth. Across the fire, a Wampanoag elder breaks a piece of roasted squash with his fingers and passes half to a woman seated beside him. She accepts it without a word. Their faces remain still, unreadable. You notice how their movements lack the twitchy nervousness of the settlers. They are alert, yes, but composed, like people used to sitting still, used to being watched. One of the younger settlers starts to speak, something about planting, about how the corn grew taller this year. His voice carries just a little too loud, just a little too eager. Winslow cuts in quickly, translating only part of it, then redirecting the moment with a question about hunting. The younger man falls silent, cheeks flushed, eyes cast down. You pretend not to notice. Everyone pretends not to notice. A dog wanders through the edge of the circle, ribs showing, tongue flicking out to lap at a smear of grease in the dirt. No one chases it away. There's not enough strength left for scolding. It finds a discarded bone and trots off into the tall grass, tail swishing through the mist. The fire snaps again. You pull your cloak tighter and glance at the sky. The clouds haven't lifted, and the light has already begun to dim. Evening will come soon. It's hard to tell how much time has passed. This sort of gathering, if it can be called that, has no rhythm, no toasts, no speeches, just a slow, stilted motion from hand to mouth, bowl to lap, bite to chew. You take another piece of venison and force it between your teeth. The meat is stringy, dry at the edges, and too tough near the centre. You work your jaw like a tool. Your gums are sore where 2 molars came loose last month and never healed right. You chew carefully, swallowing as much from instinct as from desire. The man beside you wipes his fingers on a scrap of cloth. You realise you've been eating in silence for at least 10 minutes. You've spoken to no one. No one has spoken to you, and yet you're part of something. However strange, however brittle, a shared action, a collective chewing. You reach again for the corn mush, pinch off another piece, and raise it to your mouth. You bite down. The grease seeps into your tongue. You try not to wince, the fire has burned lower now. Its glow flickers more than it shines, the light catching on smoke and faces in uneven patches. You've eaten enough to be uncomfortable, but not enough to feel full. No one here eats until fullness. The food has gone cold on most of the planks, half consumed or passed over for the least bitter portion. The grease has congealed, the mush has stiffened. A thin film of ash drifts across a bowl near your feet, unnoticed or ignored. People are shifting more now, rubbing arms, clearing throats, looking toward the sky as though wondering if this means it's time to go. But no one leaves. A settler, one of the younger men, face flushed, hair tied back too tightly, leans toward a Wampanoag man, seated across the fire. He begins to speak in slow, loud English, not cruelly, not mockingly, just with the misguided certainty that volume will cross the chasm that language does not. "Thank you," he says, drawing out each syllable like it might carry weight. "This," and here he gestures broadly, one hand sweeping over the food, the fire, the circle of tired bodies. "This is good. It is good." The Wampanoag man tilts his head slightly, blinking once, then turns to the man beside him and says something in his own language. Quiet, low, too fluid to pass. A third man chuckles, and the sound passes quickly down the line. It is not a cruel laugh, it is not loud, but it carries. The young settler's face tightens. He nods, attempts a sheepish smile, and then looks down at his hands. He does not speak again. You watch this unfold from your place on the edge of the circle. You say nothing. You've learned better. Somewhere to your left, Winslow steps in with the interpreter again. He crouches low beside another pair, an older settler attempting to pass a wooden cup forward, one hand held open in offering, the other fumbling to gesture thanks. Winslow smooths it over with soft tones and half-phrases, his body angled in a way that turns awkwardness into ritual. He's gotten good at it, this translation of half-meant gestures and overreaching goodwill. But even he looks tired. The Wampanoag men respond with short replies and polite expressions, but the words are not echoed. The meaning doesn't seem to stick. The fire pops loudly, startling a child into a small yelp. His mother hushes him, patting his shoulder too hard, like she's embarrassed he made a sound. The Wampanoag ignore it, or pretend to, or perhaps it's nothing to them at all. You realise with some dull surprise that you have no idea what counts as impolite in their eyes, or what counts as rude, or reverent, or foolish. You've never been told, only what not to do. The sounds of the meal continue around you, though the edge has gone from them. What had once been the focused, near-mechanical chewing of hunger has softened into scattered motions. Someone cracks a bone to suck out the marrow. The snap echoes sharp against the wet earth. Someone else scrapes the bottom of a pot with a broken spoon, the metal grating across wood, like teeth against stone. A bowl tips. A dog whines and is kicked away. Not harshly, just firmly enough to send it limping into the dark. And through it all, that murmur of syllables you cannot understand, rising, falling, soft and sharp. A language you've never truly heard clearly, even though you've been surrounded by it for months. It floats like smoke, curling around the fire and slipping between the gaps in conversation. Sometimes a word sounds familiar, a name or place, a repeated sound that you've learned to recognize, even if not to grasp. Other times it is pure music, melodic, rhythmic, untouchable. You glance across the gathering again and realize that the Wampanoag seem entirely at ease. Not relaxed exactly, but composed. Where the settlers twitch and fidget and glance around with sidelong uncertainty, their guests sit straight, their limbs loose, their eyes unafraid. One of them, a tall man with white paint across his nose and cheeks, is carving something with a thin stone blade, his fingers working smoothly, never pausing even as he speaks to the man beside him. You realise you haven't seen any of them shift awkwardly or stumble over a gesture. They know how to be here. You do not. The settlers have begun whispering. Low, halting sentences passed between elbows and shoulders, usually accompanied by a shrug or an embarrassed glance. "Did you hear what he said?" one asks. "Was that about the hunting?" Another replies. Someone else wonders aloud what happens if Massasoit doesn't like the food. A fourth mutters something about the smell of one of the dishes, and a fifth tells him to hush. You hear the worry in it, not fear of violence necessarily, but fear of failure, fear of being misread, fear that this fragile stillness might break if someone speaks too plainly or laughs at the wrong time. You don't try to join the conversation. You have nothing to add. Your throat is dry, your mouth still tastes of ash and salt, and your thoughts feel distant, as if your body is here, but the rest of you is standing somewhere a few feet back, watching it all through fogged glass. You pick at the edge of your sleeve, where the seam has started to fray. The thread is coming loose again. You meant to fix it days ago. Someone stands and begins passing out something wrapped in leaves. Roasted chestnuts, maybe, or some kind of boiled root. A few settlers accept them eagerly. A few decline. One man asks what it is. The Wampanoag youth handing it out does not reply. He just moves on. There is no offence taken, but no clarity given either. The gift is offered, not explained. The wind picks up again and the fire stutters. Smoke swirls sideways and into your eyes. You blink against it, turning your head just slightly. And that's when you realise how crowded the circle has become. Not with bodies, but with noise. Not loud, but layered. The fire, the words, the scraping, the chewing, the shifting of wood under weight. All of it happening at once, overlapping in that way that makes solitude impossible, even when no one is looking at you. And yet, despite it all, you feel profoundly alone. You stand. No one stops you. No one even notices. You step back from the log, away from the fire, away from the low tide of voices and gestures, and laughter you don't understand. Your legs feel stiff from sitting. Your knees complain, and your ankle still throbs faintly from earlier. You move slowly, carefully, toward the trees at the edge of the clearing. The ground here is softer, covered in damp leaves that muffle your steps. You find a small rise just beyond the edge of the firelight, marked by a half-fallen tree and a scattering of moss-covered stones. You lower yourself onto one, knees bent, back hunched slightly to keep the cold from crawling under your cloak. From here, the fire looks smaller. The people look like shadows. You listen. You listen to the snapping of bones, the squelch of ladles stirring too thin stew, the hum of conversation that never touches you, the rustle of painted garments, the occasional burst of foreign syllables, sharp and bright against the monotone of English murmurs. You don't know what's being said. You don't know if you're being discussed or ignored or simply witnessed. It all feels very far away now. You don't know how long you've been sitting there beneath the tree. The fire feels like a distant signal, flickering, shrinking each time you glance back, though you know it's only your eyes adjusting to the dark. The voices have blurred into something ambient, a current of sound with no distinct words attached. Every so often, you catch a laugh or a cough or the scrape of wood on wood, but none of it reaches you in a way that feels personal. It's just noise now, background to the way your thoughts drift. The log beneath you has softened with moss, and the bark has begun to peel in strips beneath your fingers. You've been worrying it without realizing, pulling away slivers and letting them fall to the damp earth at your feet. Your hands are cold, but not numb, just slow. There's a shallow ache in your spine, the sort that settles in when you've been still too long, but don't quite want to move. You tell yourself you'll get up soon, that you'll rejoin the others, but you don't. You're about to close your eyes when you hear the soft shuffle of steps nearby. Not from the clearing, from behind, lighter than boots, closer than you expect. You turn your head and see him, a youth, maybe 15, maybe 17, bare arms, long black hair tied loosely with fibre cord, his face painted in faded ochre streaks. Wampanoag, obviously. You recognise some of the same woven patterns on his tunic that others near Massasoit wore earlier. He doesn't speak, just lowers himself onto the edge of the same log you're sitting on, slowly, carefully, like he's used to making himself small in unfamiliar places. For a moment, you simply sit there together, both of you angled slightly apart, like two stones in the same stream facing different directions. He doesn't look at you. Neither do you look at him, at least not directly. But he's close enough that you can see the dirt under his fingernails, the calluses on his hands, the way his knee bounces once and then goes still. You clear your throat gently, though there's no real need. It just feels like something to do. After a minute or so, you nod. A small movement, not practiced, not ceremonial, just an acknowledgement. He nods back, the motion equally subdued. Nothing about it feels formal. It just happens. You think about saying something. The words come slowly. They feel heavier than they should. Your lips part, but nothing escapes at first. Then you try. Thanks, you say, barely above a whisper. The word feels pale as it leaves your mouth, weak, almost childish. He doesn't react, not with confusion or comprehension, just stillness. You wonder if he even heard you. You clear your throat again, this time with a little more resolve, and try something else. Friend? You say it with more weight, though your voice cracks halfway through. You don't know why you chose that word. You just did. Still, no response. Not a visible one. He doesn't shift, doesn't look at you, but his hand moves slowly into a pouch at his side. You watch from the corner of your eye as he pulls something out. A small shell, pale pink with a deep curl, polished smooth from time and water. He turns it in his fingers for a moment, then places it gently on the log between you. You look at it, then at him. There is no gesture, no smile, no explanation. He doesn't point to it or nudge it toward you. He simply sets it there, lets his hand rest beside it for a breath or two, and then withdraws. The shell sits still in the narrow space between your thighs, catching a glint of firelight through the trees. You reach for it slowly, not sure if you're allowed to take it, but he doesn't stop you. Your fingers close around it, and it's warm from his hand. You hold it in your palm for a while, turning it once, twice, watching the dim ridges shift under the fire's flickering glow. It's just a shell. You've seen hundreds like it along the shoreline, but this one feels different, if only because of where it came from, or how. You want it to mean something. You want to believe there's weight to this exchange, but you don't know what the shell means. It could be a gesture of kindness. It could be something offered out of politeness or habit or boredom. It could be nothing. A child's toy, a discarded trinket. You want to ask, but the words stick. You have nothing in his language, and he seems to need nothing in yours. You glance sideways again and catch him watching you, just briefly, just enough to register that he sees the way you cradle the shell, the way your fingers curl around it protectively. There's no smile, no nod, just a faint twitch in the corner of his mouth, so slight it might not be anything at all. Then he looks away again. Your stomach growls quietly. You wince, though the sound was soft. You haven't eaten much, and what you did eat isn't sitting well. Your body is tired in a way that food won't fix, but it still demands more. You grip the shell a little tighter, then let your hand relax. The youth rises suddenly, not abruptly, just with a kind of finality, as if the moment, whatever it was, has passed. He brushes off the back of his tunic, adjusts the strap across his chest, and takes a step backward from the log. Still no words. He looks down at you one last time, unreadable. You offer the faintest nod again, not sure what you're nodding to. He turns and walks away, steps light and even. You watch him disappear into the tree line, his silhouette fading into the grey dusk like a wisp of wood smoke. There's no trail, no break in the brush. He's simply gone. You remain on the log, staring at the shell in your hand. It feels heavier now, not in weight, but in expectation. You want it to be a gift, you want it to be a symbol, but you know better than to build meaning on wishes. Still, you don't put it down. Behind you the fire crackles, voices rise and fall, laughter hums in a language you'll never speak. The gathering continues, the feast goes on. But out here, under the trees with a single shell in your palm, and no words to shape the silence, you feel more alone than ever, and somehow, also less. The light fades slowly, more like a surrender than a setting. The trees around you melt into darker shapes, and the fire at the centre of the clearing throws longer, more uncertain shadows across the ground. Smoke clings low to the earth now, curling around boots and skirts like fog that's forgotten how to rise. Somewhere behind the thinning clouds, the sun drags itself toward the edge of the world, unseen but felt. The warmth it gave earlier, modest, fleeting, has vanished entirely, leaving a chill that creeps steadily back in through your sleeves, up your spine, into the soft places behind your eyes. You still hold the shell, cradled in your palm like it might anchor you to something solid. Its surface is dry now and cool. The firelight makes its pale curve glow faintly, but it has lost whatever warmth it carried from the hand that gave it to you. You tuck it into your cloak, near your chest, not because you fear losing it, but because it feels wrong to leave it behind. Then you rest your hands in your lap and let your gaze blur. The present slips away. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly, like breath leaving a lung too tired to hold it. The fire, the voices, the feast, they dim. Your mind reaches backward, as it sometimes does when the silence is just deep enough to invite it. And there it is, last winter. You don't remember the beginning of it clearly anymore. It came in parts, first the cold, then the damp, then the way the walls wept every night and froze every morning, then the coughing. One voice at first, rough and low, tucked into the corner of a crowded room, then another and another, until the sound became a kind of chorus, dry, wet, shallow, racking. You couldn't tell which was worse. Some coughed until they bled. Some coughed and then simply didn't wake. You remember the night the baby died. The crying had been constant for days, thin and reedy, the kind that cut straight through walls. No one slept. Everyone was pretending not to be annoyed, pretending they weren't thinking the worst. Then the crying stopped. Just stopped. And you all pretended not to notice that too. The next morning, the mother sat outside the cabin, the child wrapped tight in her arms, not moving. Not even when the wind picked up and turned the corners of her blanket white with frost. She sat there until someone finally coaxed the bundle away. You didn't know her name. You still don't. There was a week, maybe more, maybe less, when the flour ration ran out and someone passed around a boiled leather strap, cut into strips and softened in broth. You chewed it for a long time, not because it tasted good, but because chewing gave your jaw something to do, a small occupation to replace panic. The broth was grey. You didn't ask what had been in it. No one did. Another day, someone found a dead gull near the shore, its wings frozen at strange angles. They brought it back, cleaned it, cooked it with a handful of herbs and moss, and called it stew. You ate it gratefully, knowing it was the same bird that had been circling the burial site a few days prior. No one mentioned that. You all agreed in silence that meat was meat. That was how things worked then. You remember the shallow graves most of all, digging in earth that fought you every inch of the way, frozen, stiff and stubborn, blunting shovels and splitting palms. You'd use rocks sometimes, broken wood, your feet, anything that might tear up enough soil to let you hide the dead before the animals came. You buried them in the dark, when the sun was too cold to be useful, and grief was easier without light. You stopped marking the graves after a while. There were too many, or maybe there weren't. Maybe there were just enough to make you stop counting. One night, you awoke to the sound of someone moving across the floor. Soft steps, careful. You thought it might be a thief, or a child sneaking food, but it was a woman you barely knew. She opened the door and stepped outside, barefoot without a word. The snow had fallen earlier that day, wet and heavy, covering everything in a layer of slush. You waited for her to come back. She didn't. In the morning, a few of the men went looking. They found a trail of footprints leading toward the trees. Then nothing, just snow. Some said she meant to gather wood. Others said she'd gone mad from hunger. You never learned which it was. You think of all this now, as the feast stretches behind you, this display of smoke and meat and motion, and you feel like you're looking at it from the other side of a river. You are here technically, but not part of it. Not fully. You know how thin the thread is that holds this moment together. You know how easily it can snap. You've lived with that knowledge for months, like a splinter under the skin, invisible, but always pressing. A burst of laughter breaks the quiet nearby. Not cruel, just surprised, unguarded. You turn your head and see a group near the fire passing around a charred piece of meat. Someone must have said something clever or shared a joke. One of the younger settlers claps another on the back, and even a few of the Wampanoag smile. It looks genuine. You watch them not with envy, but with confusion. You wonder how they can find levity in all this, if it's real, if they've truly managed to forget, even for a moment, the months of silence and death and slow gnawing hunger that led to this gathering. You glance around and notice others smiling too. A woman holds her daughter on her lap and hums a lullaby, soft and tuneless, but clearly meant to soothe. An older man offers his flask to someone half his age, and they share it without words. A few Wampanoag are passing baskets between them, distributing the last of something that smells faintly sweet. The fire throws golden light on their faces, smoothing the lines of tension. It could almost pass for joy. You feel out of step with it, like you've missed a signal or failed to stand when the music played. There is something performative in it all, this show of warmth, this pantomime of peace. But there's something sincere too, and that sincerity cuts more deeply than the performance ever could. Because you can't match it. You want to, maybe, but your body won't follow. Your mind is still in the cold, still in the silence, still in the dark where nothing grew and everything ached. You rub your hands together, trying to chase away the chill, but the cold isn't in your skin. It's in your marrow. Your bones remember too much. They creak with it. Every laugh you hear feels like it's happening underwater, distorted and slow, detached from whatever impulse might have caused it. You watch your neighbours smile and think about how many of their spouses, their children, their friends, lie in that unmarked patch of earth behind the common house. You wonder if they've really forgotten, or if this is just what pretending looks like. A hand touches your shoulder, lightly, not insistent, just a reminder. You turn and see one of the women from the cooking line, thin, eyes shadowed, but wearing a faint expression that might be encouragement. Her fingers linger on your cloak, then lift slightly, as if to gesture upward. You realise your face has gone slack, your mouth set too flat, your brow too tight. You should smile, she says, her voice barely audible over the wind. They're watching. You nod. Not because you agree, but because it's easier than speaking. You pull your mouth into a shape that might pass for a smile, and you hold it just long enough to make her leave. Then you let it fall. The fire flickers in the corner of your vision, low and steady, its embers pulsing with the rhythm of breath. You sit closer to it now, though not so close as to draw attention. The warmth feels good on your knees, even if your hands still tremble slightly from the cold you carried in from the tree line. Around you, the circles have loosened. Some people are rising, others linger, scraping bowls or passing around crusts of ash-dusted bread. The air smells of smoke and grease and bodies. It's not unpleasant, just thick. Everything is thicker now. Your thoughts, your limbs, the mood. You shift your weight on the log and glance across the fire. The Wampanoag are still seated, still composed, still alert. Their posture hasn't sagged with fatigue the way yours has. Their eyes haven't dulled. They look cleaner somehow, even in the low light, their movements smoother, less mechanical. You catch one of them watching you, a younger man, with pale markings along his jawline and a long scar running down his forearm. His expression is unreadable. You look away before you can try to translate it into anything comforting. You scan the group slowly, careful not to linger on any one face too long. Not out of politeness exactly, but because you've learned that your gaze can be interpreted in ways you don't understand. The Wampanoag speak with glances, with the tilt of a head, with the length of a pause between gestures. You've seen them do it with each other. A sideways look can say more than a paragraph in English. But you've never been taught their language. You only know the words others have filtered through interpreters, or passed around like rumours. Still, you watch them now, quietly, as they sit in the same firelight as you, their features shifting between soft and sharp, as the flames rise and fall. You wonder what they see when they look back. Do they see survivors, like your leaders claim? Brave settlers, forged by hardship and faith, clinging to the edge of the world, with grit and prayer? Or do they see something else? Foreigners who arrived without invitation, sick and starving, desperate enough to steal and proud enough to deny it? Do they see starving invaders? Pitiful guests? Dangerous fools? You think of what they've given, not just venison and maize and guidance on which seeds to plant where, but tolerance, time, patience, the kind that cost something. When your walls were still just piles of timber, they could have driven you out. When disease swept through your camp, they could have left you to rot. They didn't. They brought fish. They showed you how to dig for clams. They explained which berries wouldn't kill your children. They taught you how to make the land say something other than no. You try to think of what you've offered in return. Guns. You think of the guns first. Always the guns. They're visible, even now, muskets propped against cabin doors, pistols on belts, the nervous way your neighbour's fingers twitch near the triggers when conversation grows too unfamiliar. You've offered metal, powder, promises of defence, as if you're in a position to protect anyone, as if you even know the names of your allies' enemies. You've handed out beads maybe, ribbons, a few blunted tools from England that no one here uses properly, a handful of trinkets in exchange for a culture you don't understand. And you've offered words, of course, endless words, promises and pacts and treaties drawn up with good intentions and bad ink. You've signed your names to papers that mean nothing in a place where survival depends on rain and soil and trust. You've declared peace while watching from behind fences. You've preached unity while praying the balance of power doesn't shift before you're ready. The truth is you've brought more confusion than comfort, more rules than resources, more warnings than warmth. You think again of the faces across the fire, the calm ones, the quiet ones. You think of the women who brought baskets of corn to your sickbeds, the men who showed your hunters how to follow hoofprints through snow. You think of Squanto, still somewhere among the crowd, the only man who's ever truly bridged the gap between your two worlds, and how the settlers rely on him like a crutch, even while some whisper that he cannot be trusted. You think of all the talk about alliances, about diplomacy, about mutual respect. But you also remember the guns, the watch rotations, the conversations about defense strategies that never stopped, not even during prayer. And now you're here, eating greasy stew and salted meat beside the very people who have made your survival possible. And you can't shake the feeling that you're haunting your own table, like a ghost that refuses to move on. You're fed, yes, but you haven't earned this food. Not really. You're sheltered, but only because someone else held the roof beams in place when yours collapsed. You're alive because others chose not to let you die. You catch another glance from across the fire. A different man this time, older, face marked by age and weather. His gaze is softer, but still unreadable. You try to imagine what he sees in you. Hollow cheeks, pale eyes, hands too thin for labour, a face lined more by fear than wisdom. You don't look like someone who belongs here. You look like a problem postponed, a burden tolerated. You think of the stories your leaders tell, the ones about destiny and divine right and taming the wilderness. They never sound right when you're near the Wampanoag. Not when you see how easily they move through the forest, how quietly they sit, how their eyes miss nothing. It's not the wilderness that needs taming. It's you. You're the disruption. The one out of place. You're the one who still doesn't understand the rules, even after a year of surviving by accident. You turn your gaze back to your fellow settlers and wonder if they feel it too. Some are laughing now. Tired, cautious laughter, but real. A man is showing a young girl how to roast a chestnut on a stick, the two of them smiling at the small hiss of steam as the shell splits. Another is passing around a jug of something fermented, each drink accompanied by a grimace and a chuckle. They look like they're starting to believe the story, the one about how this is the beginning of something hopeful. You wish you could believe it too, but your eyes keep drifting back to the Wampanoag, to the calm way they sit, to the way they watch without speaking, to the way they've been here longer than you can fathom and still seem unsure what you want from them. You wonder how long they'll let this balance hold. You wonder what it will take to tip it. A bad winter, a broken promise, a musket fired too early, too nervously. You know it's fragile. You know it always has been. You glance down at your hands and notice that you've been clenching them. The shell the boy gave you is still there, tucked against your chest, hidden from view. You press your palm to it gently, trying to remember what it felt like to receive it, whether that was a gift or a test. You wish you had asked. You wish you had been brave enough to ask. Across the fire, the older Wampanoag man stands. Others follow. Not all at once, but in a slow, organic way, like trees swaying together in a shared wind. They begin to gather their things, baskets, knives, cloaks, and prepare to return to wherever they came from. You watch them move, not quickly, not slowly, just with quiet certainty. The settlers notice too, rising to their feet with clumsy urgency, unsure whether to wave or speak, or simply step aside. You remain seated for a moment longer, watching the firelight stretch and scatter across the clearing. You watch the faces you cannot read. You watch the food being packed away, the smiles being put back on like well-worn coats. You feel the weight of something unspoken, something unfinished, something fragile and enormous that no one here has the language for. Then you lower your gaze and turn away. You go to bed without ceremony. No prayers, no thanks, no words exchanged. Just the quiet rustle of your cloak as you lie down, still wearing the day's damp on your sleeves. The fire has already burned itself out. You stare into the dark for a long time, listening to the wind scrape the shutters, to the faint creak of beams above your head, to the ache in your own bones. You tell yourself it's finished, that the feast is over, that the guests will leave, that tomorrow will return to whatever passes for normal. But deep down, you don't believe it. And in the morning, you're right. You wake to the sound of laughter. Real laughter. Not the dry, startled bursts you've grown used to, but full-bodied, rhythmic sound rising and falling like breath on a warmer day. For a moment, in the haze between sleep and waking, you think you must be imagining it. But then you hear it again, closer now, coming from beyond the wall, from somewhere in the centre of the settlement. Someone claps their hands. A voice calls something in a language you still don't understand. Then more laughter. It's not loud, but it carries. You blink against the thin grey light slipping through the cracks in your shutters. Your mouth is dry, your legs ache. You slept fully clothed again, your cloak twisted beneath you, and your boots still damp from the day before. You sit up slowly, shoulders stiff, your neck bent at the wrong angle from using your arm as a pillow. A bit of ash falls from your sleeve as you move. You brush it away without thinking. The fire has gone out. Of course it has. You didn't feed it last night. You didn't do much of anything last night, except sit in the dark and listen to the wind. You were too full to sleep and too tired to care. You lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about what the shell in your hand meant, or whether the Wampanoag left the feast last night, thinking you were fools, or just too thin to worry about. You rise slowly, shaking out your limbs, and push open the door. The air outside is milder than yesterday, damp still but not biting. A strange calm clings to the colony, smoke rising gently from a few hearths, chickens muttering near the animal pens, a low hum of activity that doesn't quite match the hour. Then you see the movement at the centre of the settlement. More figures gathered near the common fire. Not just settlers. The Wampanoag are still here. You weren't expecting that. You step closer, brushing sleep from your eyes, and count them again. 20, 30, maybe more. Some of them are sitting on logs. Others are standing in loose groups, talking, gesturing calmly, faces unreadable as ever. A few of the settlers are already moving among them, offering food, pouring cups of broth or fermented berry drink, bending awkwardly at the waist in a way that suggests nervous gratitude. No one looks angry, no one looks thrilled either. The feast, it seems, is not over. You hear someone say, "They're staying another day," and another voice responds, "To be polite, maybe?" Someone else mutters, "Or to watch." And then the conversation trails off into coughs and shrugs. No one seems sure whether this second gathering is a blessing or a complication. No one knows who invited it, or if it was invited at all. You're not asked to help with the meal preparations, but you drift toward the activity anyway. A few people nod in your direction. A woman passes you with a basket of dried berries. Someone else is skinning a bird with a dull blade, pulling at the tendons with a slow, steady motion that suggests long practice and no real interest. You offer your hands once, then again. No one takes you up on it. Eventually, you end up holding a pot over a small fire, stirring something that smells faintly of turnip and sour herbs. It doesn't need stirring, you know that, but it gives your hands something to do. You watch the steam rise, then look up and across the clearing. The Wampanoag seem as unbothered as they did yesterday. If they're judging you, they don't show it. If they're tired of being here, they hide it well. They speak quietly among themselves, some laughing, some just watching. A few help carry firewood, help pass food, help without being asked. You don't know if this is goodwill or just a performance of it. You don't know if you're being honoured or observed, and you can't bring yourself to care either way. You're tired, not just in your body, but somewhere deeper, somewhere more difficult to reach, a kind of fatigue that eats thought before it forms. You're tired of the ritual, of the smiling, of the silence that fills every pause in conversation with something heavier than noise. You're tired of pretending this feast means anything more than the fact that you didn't die this year. You're tired of surviving in a place that does not want you, where even a warm meal feels like an accusation. So you keep stirring. The stew doesn't change, neither do you. As midday approaches, the activity swells again. Food is passed from hand to hand, planks are cleared and repopulated, children sit cross-legged on the ground, picking at roasted nuts. The governor makes another small speech, this one shorter than the last, his voice sounding more like obligation than inspiration. Winslow translates, or perhaps he doesn't. You can't tell anymore. You've stopped listening. You take a few bites of something, boiled squash maybe, or mashed chestnut. It tastes like glue. You chew it slowly, then stop halfway through and swallow without finishing. Your stomach doesn't feel right today. Not full, not empty, just unwilling. Someone next to you offers you a scrap of roasted meat. You decline with a shake of the head. You don't even look to see who it is. There's too much movement now, too much talking, too many faces. You rise from your place, nod once in no direction, and drift backward until you reach the edge of the circle. No one follows. No one asks where you're going. It's better that way. You walk past the cabins, past the rows of drying hides, and the barrel of smoked eel set off to one side near the storehouse. You glance around, see no one watching, and lift the lid. The smell hits you first, briny, oily, sharp with rot around the edges. You reach in, grab one, cold and slippery, and tuck it into your coat before closing the lid again. You don't know why you bother hiding it. Instinct, probably. You walk toward the woods, not fast, just with purpose. The eel presses against your chest, soaking a new patch of fabric with its slick residue. You don't mind, you've carried worse. The trees swallow you gently. The sounds of the feast grow muffled, then distant. The wind picks up just slightly in the canopy, and the leaves shift like old paper. You walk until the clearing disappears behind you, until the ground softens beneath your boots, and the air feels like it belongs to something older than fire and fear. You stop beside a low stump and sit. You pull the eel from your coat and hold it in both hands. It's not warm. It never was. You take a bite, chew twice, then spit it out into the leaves. The salt burns your tongue. You look into the trees, past the place where the settlement hides, and you think about walking farther, about slipping into the woods and not coming back until the feast is over, until the visitors are gone, until no one expects you to smile again. But you don't move, not really. There's nowhere else to go. Eventually, you head back. The shadows are longer now, the sky dimming into the colour of old parchment. You hear the muffled sounds of conversation again, the scrape of pots, the final shifting of benches. The feast is winding down, not with a bang, but with a kind of quiet surrender. By the time you step into the clearing, the guests are already leaving. They leave without fanfare. No final toast, no benediction, no words that lingered. Just the sound of boots brushing through damp grass, the low murmur of voices speaking in a language you'll never master, and the soft thump of feet meeting frost-hardened soil as the line of Wampanoag vanishes back into the woods the way they came. No one waves, no one follows. The settlers stand in their scattered clusters, watching in silence until the last of them slips from view. Then everyone simply turns and resumes their chores. Now you stand by the dying fire, wiping grease from your fingers with a scrap of cloth that smells of ash and broth. Your hands are cracked and swollen in the knuckles. You flex them slowly, then rub your palms together to keep the cold from creeping deeper. The fire spits once low and reluctant, and then settles into a soft, crackling hush. The flames are no longer bright, just pale tongues flickering through blackened wood and half-burnt bones. Around you, the remnants of the feast are being gathered with the dull focus of habit. Someone dumps out a pot that's gone sour overnight. Someone else stirs coals to see if there's heat left to salvage. Two boys carry a board with scraps of meat and bread still clinging to it, lifting it carefully like it's something worth preserving. No one speaks unless they must. The celebration, if it ever was one, has slipped from memory faster than the sun rises on a grey morning. You catch a glimpse of Winslow crouched by the hearth, scraping a charred skin of eel from the bottom of a kettle. He doesn't look up. Beside him, the governor speaks in low tones to one of the elders, their faces drawn tight by fatigue and whatever quiet argument they're not quite having. Someone has already begun tallying what remains. You hear the words flour and smokehouse and salt whispered with the kind of urgency usually reserved for sickness. A man nearby turns over a piece of fish with his boot, shrugs, and walks away. You help where you can, piling planks, shaking out soiled cloth, tucking the last of the bitter greens into a barrel lined with bark. A woman hands you a small pouch of dried berries. You count them before tucking them away. 12. You immediately start thinking of how to stretch them over a week. Maybe 2. It's not even conscious, just reflex. No one thanks you. You don't expect them to. The wind has picked up again, tugging at your sleeves and whistling low through the eaves of the cabins. You watch the smoke rise from the last embers and wonder how long it will be before snow comes. You hope late. You always hope late, but your body already knows otherwise. Your joints are aching in ways they never did before the first winter. Your fingertips go stiff when the sun disappears behind clouds. There's a pressure in your skull when the air turns heavy. The signs are already there. The land is just waiting to deliver the verdict. You find yourself staring at the patch of earth where the feast took place, now scattered with trampled grass, broken twigs, and cold ash. The seating planks are being dismantled. The makeshift benches are being dragged back toward the storage shed. The whole scene is unspooling itself as if it had never been. You can already imagine tomorrow's clearing, empty, damp, quiet, a place that remembers nothing. You walk toward the edge of the woods, if only for the stillness, but you don't go far. Just a few steps into the tree line, just far enough that the voices fade and the wind feels sharper. You sit for a moment on a rock, slick with moss, and look out across the settlement. It's not beautiful. It never has been. Just cabins and wood piles, fences that lean too far in one direction, roofs patched with mismatched shingles. But it's what you have, what you're expected to defend when spring comes and the world starts shifting again. You think of the treaties, of the tense negotiations, of the promises made with tight smiles and clenched hands. You think of how close the balance feels to breaking, of how one frost too many, one barrel gone missing, one accusation whispered too loud, could tilt everything back toward violence. You wonder how long the Wampanoag will see you as worth tolerating. You wonder what they whispered in their own language once the fires dimmed. You wonder if the feast meant something to them, or if they walked away thinking what you've begun to suspect, that this was all for nothing. Back at the fire, bones are being sorted, not for burial, for boiling. There's still fat to render, broth to make, warmth to steal from marrow. You join the task quietly, your hands numb as you gather the lighter ones, placing them in a pot already blackened from a dozen uses. You listen to the rattle they make against the metal, like dice, like teeth, like something broken being repurposed for survival. Later, you find a moment to steal a crust of bread from a cooling board. It's dry and slightly mouldy at the edge, but you scrape off the worst of it and chew without tasting. You think of the eel you left in the woods. You think of the boy who gave you the shell. You think of nothing for a long time. As the light fades completely, the final tasks are done. Pots are scrubbed, fires banked, barrels sealed. People drift back to their cabins without saying goodnight. There are no prayers, no benedictions, no songs, just the quiet shuffle of boots over cold ground and the slow creak of door hinges closing for the night. You enter your own shelter without lighting a lantern. There's no need. You know every inch by memory now. The slope of the roof, the sag of the cot, the place where the draft always slips in no matter how tightly you wedge the cloth. You shed your cloak slowly, wincing as your shoulders complain. Your hands are still sticky from grease, but there's no clean water left. You wipe them on your trousers and move toward your bed. The straw has flattened again. The smell of old sweat and mildew rises as you lower yourself down. You lie on your side, knees drawn up, back curved inward. Your boots stay on. You're too tired to remove them. You're not even sure you'll sleep. Your body hums with a restlessness that isn't hunger or pain, just the echo of something stretched too long and finally allowed to sag. You think about the coming weeks, the cold nights and shorter days, the tools that need mending, the food that won't last. You think about the rationing chart on the common house wall, about how many names are left to feed, about who's strong enough to make it through another February. You try not to think of last winter, but it slips in anyway. It always does. The wind scratches at the wall. You hear the boards flex. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and stare into the dark. There is no comfort in the silence, no peace, just the slow, quiet relief that this, whatever it was, is over, that no one expects anything from you tonight, that for once you do not have to smile. You close your eyes, you try not to dream. That brings us to the end of tonight's quiet unravelling. The 2-day murmur of a feast history swells with meaning, though few who sat through it could say why. You weren't a founder, or a fighter, or even a speaker of the right words. Just a worn settler, starving in a half-built world, sharing silence with strangers who saw you clearer than you saw yourself. If you'd like early access to more of these slow descents into forgotten moments, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other forgotten corners of history you'd like to see covered. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Amanda Lampke, and Rich Davis. Sleep well.